The broken man. Nolan Carter's life had been turned upside down in the blink of an eye. Just a year ago, he was a successful tech entrepreneur, the pride of his family and community. He had built his startup from the ground up, and everyone had high hopes for him. Yet in the aftermath of a tragic event, those hopes shattered. The once strong man now existed in a fog of grief and self-doubt, unable to shake the overwhelming guilt that consumed him. It had all started with a car accident, the kind of incident that could happen to anyone but never seems fair when it's your life. Nolan's younger brother, Ethan, was the one driving. Ethan had always been reckless, but that night, the choices they made led to a disaster. The two of them had been driving home late after a celebration of a small business success when Ethan swerved to avoid hitting an animal in the road. The car flipped over, and though Nolan survived, Ethan did not. For months, Nolan could barely face anyone. His once thriving business crumbled in the wake of the accident. Legal battles, mounting debt, and the collapse of his personal life left him without any semblance of control. His parents, who once looked to him for guidance, were devastated, but they had their own pain to carry. Nolan couldn't bear to see them, knowing he had failed them all, especially Ethan. Now, in the middle of a bitter winter, Nolan lived alone in a dingy apartment, far from the luxurious life he once knew. His only company was the harsh, cold air that seeped through the cracks in the window and the bottle of whiskey that had become his constant companion. His apartment was sparse and depressing, a reflection of his current state, a place in ruins just like him. It wasn't much, but it was enough for someone who wanted to disappear from the world. The harsh truth was that Nolan didn't know how to move forward. He couldn't bring himself to leave his apartment except for the occasional trip to the store, and even then he felt like a ghost. Every day was the same. Wake up with a pounding headache, drink to dull the pain, stare at the walls, and repeat. There was no purpose, no joy, just a constant weight pressing down on his chest. He would lie awake at night, feeling suffocated by his own thoughts, but sleep never came easy. But that evening, something strange happened. Nolan, stumbling to the store for more alcohol, crossed paths with a woman. It wasn't anything extraordinary at first. Just a brief encounter, a moment in passing, but it felt different. The woman, wrapped in a scarf and coat, stepped out of a convenience store and collided lightly with him, knocking the bag from his hands. He froze for a moment, irritated, but when he looked at her, something in her eyes stopped him. She looked at him with a kind of concern, as if she could see through him, see the emptiness he felt deep inside. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice warm and sincere. She knelt to pick up the bag, handing it back to him. "No, it's fine," Nolan muttered, brushing it off, embarrassed by his own internal reaction to the brief encounter. "Just careful next time." But before he could turn away, she spoke again, this time with a gentle tone that caught him off guard. "You don't look okay. You sure you're all right?" Nolan's gut twisted. He felt exposed in a way he hadn't in a long time. His instinct was to turn away, to retreat back into his shell, but something inside him hesitated. No one had asked him if he was okay in months. Not his parents, not his friends, not even the people who used to work with him. "I'm fine," he said, his voice flat, trying to dismiss her concern. But she didn't back down. "You don't have to lie," she said softly. There was no judgment in her voice, just a quiet sincerity that made Nolan feel both uncomfortable and relieved at the same time. Before he could respond, she smiled slightly, her eyes lingering on him for a moment longer. "Anyway, I hope things get better for you," she said, her tone light but thoughtful. "Take care." And just like that, she was gone, disappearing into the snowy night. Nolan stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where she had been, unable to shake the feeling that something had shifted inside him. It was such a simple exchange, but for some reason it stayed with him. Nolan shook his head, dismissing the thoughts. He had his own problems to deal with. People didn't matter. They came and went, just like everything else. But for the first time in what felt like forever, a small flicker of something stirred deep inside him. A spark of human connection, however brief, that he didn't know he still had room for. As he walked back to his apartment, Nolan couldn't help but feel the weight of his own isolation more keenly. The loneliness that had been his constant companion seemed louder now, and he found himself wondering what it would be like to not feel so invisible. But those thoughts were fleeting, and as he stepped into his apartment, he shut the door behind him, retreating back to the darkness he had created for himself. Yet as the night wore on, Nolan couldn't shake the memory of the woman. Her kindness had cut through the fog in his mind, and for the first time in a long time, he thought, maybe there was still a reason to hope. The connection begins. Nolan Carter woke up to the same dull haze of the morning. His head ached from the alcohol the night before, and the morning light pierced through the gaps in the blinds, adding to his discomfort. He rubbed his face, trying to force himself out of the fog that had taken root in his mind. It was a slow, painful process, getting out of bed, putting on the same old clothes, and walking to the kitchen to make something that vaguely resembled breakfast. The encounter with the woman, whose name he didn't know, stayed with him all night. She had been so kind, so completely unbothered by the misery he wore on his face. It was something he hadn't experienced in so long, if ever. People used to look at him with admiration or envy, but now it was mostly pity or avoidance. He was a failure in their eyes, a reminder of what could go wrong in the world of business and ambition. But she didn't pity him, she simply saw him. That was what had unnerved him the most. Nolan tried to push the thought away, focusing on the task at hand, surviving another day. But later that afternoon, as he went down to the lobby of his apartment building to collect his mail, he saw her again. She was standing by the mailboxes, her back turned to him. She looked down at a package in her hands, then glanced up as if she sensed someone was watching her. Nolan froze for a second, not sure if he should acknowledge her. His usual defense mechanisms kicked in: avoidance, quick escape, the silence of isolation. But before he could turn around, she smiled and waved, a kind but somewhat uncertain wave, as if unsure of how he would respond. "Hey," she said, her voice light and welcoming. "I didn't think I'd run into you again." Nolan hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to these small exchanges, and he certainly wasn't used to anyone actively wanting to talk to him. His voice, when it finally came out, was quiet and awkward. "Yeah, just picking up some mail." "I saw you earlier this week," she said, her gaze softening. "I hope you're doing okay. You seemed distant, but I understand. People go through things." Nolan swallowed hard. This woman had no idea how true her words were. She had no idea what kind of things he was going through or how much it hurt just to get out of bed every day. But for some reason, her words didn't feel like a judgment. They felt understanding. "I'm getting by," he muttered. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. He was getting by in the same way someone might try to walk a tightrope while holding their breath. She seemed to take that as a small victory, nodding with a slight smile. "That's good to hear. You know, if you ever want to talk, I'm just a few floors up. I'm Amara, by the way." She extended a hand, an invitation that was simple but filled with an understanding Nolan wasn't used to. "Nolan," he said, shaking her hand reluctantly. "Thanks, I appreciate it." For a moment they stood there, neither of them speaking, before Amara broke the silence. "I'm just going to head upstairs. Maybe I'll see you around. I usually spend a lot of time at the cafe down the street in the mornings." Nolan nodded without thinking. "Yeah, sure, maybe." As she turned to leave, Nolan felt an unfamiliar pull. It wasn't that he wanted to follow her or desperately cling to the fleeting connection, but there was something about her presence that seemed to chip away at the walls he had built around himself. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he wondered if maybe he didn't have to go through all this alone. The next few days passed uneventfully. Nolan went about his usual routine, working from home, staring at his computer screen and trying to silence the thoughts that kept gnawing at him. But his thoughts often drifted to Amara. Why had she been so kind to him? Why had she reached out when most people would have looked the other way? And why did it make him feel both uncomfortable and, at the same time, strangely, hopeful? One morning, a few days later, as Nolan reluctantly ventured outside to buy more supplies for the week, he walked past the cafe Amara had mentioned. There was a small outdoor seating area, and he caught sight of her sitting at a table, a laptop open in front of her. She appeared focused on her work, but when she glanced up, she noticed him immediately. "Hey, Nolan," she called out, waving him over. "I was just thinking about you. How are you?" Nolan froze for a second, his mind racing. He hadn't planned on running into her. The fact that she seemed so genuinely happy to see him was both flattering and terrifying. But he forced his feet to move, taking slow steps toward the cafe as if his legs were made of lead. "I'm okay," he said, unsure what else to say. "Just getting some stuff for the week." "Want to join me for a coffee?" she asked, her tone casual but friendly. "I promise I won't bite." Nolan hesitated. It wasn't that he didn't want to talk to her. He did, in fact, find her presence comforting, but he wasn't sure he was ready to let anyone in. Still, something inside him stirred at the idea of having a conversation with someone who didn't expect anything from him. "Sure," he said, surprising himself. Amara smiled, motioning to the empty chair across from her. Nolan sat down awkwardly, unsure of how to start. But Amara made it easy. She was warm and engaging, asking him about his day and subtly steering the conversation toward more personal topics, though she never pressured him to reveal anything he wasn't ready to share. After a few moments of small talk, Amara paused and looked at him seriously. "You know, I've been thinking about something since we met. You seem like you're going through a lot. It's okay to not have everything figured out, Nolan. You don't have to do this alone." Her words hit him harder than he expected. There was no judgment, no pity, just a simple acknowledgement of his pain. And for a moment he felt a tear threaten to form at the corner of his eye, something he hadn't felt in months. "I don't know how to fix everything," Nolan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trying to figure it out, but I just keep failing." "You don't have to fix everything today," she said gently. "Start small, one step at a time. You don't need to do it alone." For the first time in a long while, Nolan felt like he was finally breathing again. It wasn't a cure, but it was a start. And maybe, just maybe, Amara was the lifeline he hadn't known he needed. A growing connection. The days began to blend together in ways Nolan hadn't experienced before. Amara's offer of companionship, however casual, had been the first real connection he had experienced since the accident. Despite his resistance to trust anyone, he found himself seeking her out, albeit subconsciously. He would visit the cafe in the mornings, not because he craved the coffee, but because the thought of seeing her, of hearing her soft, understanding voice, somehow brought a sense of peace he hadn't known he was missing. Amara wasn't pushy, though. She let him decide the rhythm of their interactions. Sometimes she would be there at the cafe when he showed up, a friendly face among the strangers. Other times, their conversations would happen in passing, just brief moments where she would ask him how his day was going. It wasn't much, but it was enough to slowly chip away at the walls he'd built around himself. One afternoon, as Nolan sat by his apartment window, staring blankly at the world outside, he realized how much of a change had taken place in just a few short weeks. His life had been a dull, silent march of nothingness, but now there was a spark, a reason to leave the apartment in the mornings, a reason to look forward to something more than just surviving the day. But still, Nolan fought with himself. He didn't want to become too dependent on anyone, least of all Amara. He had always prided himself on being self-reliant. Now, after the accident and everything that had followed, the idea of leaning on someone else, of needing someone, terrified him. It wasn't until one evening, when Amara showed up at his apartment unannounced, that Nolan realized just how far he had come. She had told him she wanted to check on him, and when he opened the door, he could see that she was genuinely concerned. She wasn't there to check on his progress or push him into getting over his grief. She was just there to be a friend, to offer the support he hadn't asked for but needed nonetheless. "Hey," Amara said, stepping inside without waiting for a formal invitation. "I was just thinking about you. I know it's been a while since we've had a real conversation, and you've been keeping to yourself a lot." Nolan stood in the doorway, feeling vulnerable. He had been cooped up inside for so long, and he wasn't sure how to let someone in. "I've just been busy," he replied, his voice a little defensive. "Work stuff." Amara raised an eyebrow, but she didn't press him. "I get it," she said quietly. "I just wanted to check on you. I hope I'm not intruding." Nolan shook his head, motioning for her to come in. "No, not at all. I actually appreciate you stopping by." She smiled, and Nolan noticed how natural it was for her to smile, how it seemed like she had an endless well of optimism that she shared without hesitation. It was almost a stark contrast to his own weary outlook on life. "I brought dinner," she said, holding up a brown paper bag. "I know you probably haven't had a decent meal in days." Nolan chuckled despite himself. "I've been eating just fine, but I'll take whatever you've got." They sat down at his small, cluttered kitchen table, sharing a simple meal, pasta and a side of vegetables. It wasn't much, but it felt like the most normal thing in the world. And for a few minutes, Nolan allowed himself to feel comfortable in her company, forgetting about the weight of everything that had come before. They talked about simple things, how Amara had been working on a project at her job, how Nolan had been trying to catch up with old clients, and how neither of them was particularly good at cooking. The conversation was easy, comfortable, and Nolan found himself laughing more than he had in weeks. There was no talk of grief, no mention of the past, and for the first time in a long time he felt like he was just living. As the evening wore on, Amara leaned back in her chair, studying him for a moment. There was an intensity in her gaze, something that Nolan couldn't quite place. It wasn't judgmental or intrusive, more like she was trying to understand something deeper about him. "I know you've been through a lot," Amara said softly, breaking the silence. "But I want you to know that you don't have to be alone in this. You can talk to me, Nolan. I don't expect anything, but if you ever need someone to listen, someone who isn't going to judge you for your past, I'm here." Her words hit Nolan with unexpected force. The weight of the past few months pressed down on him again, but this time there was a small relief in it. He didn't have to carry the burden alone. She was offering something he hadn't known he needed, a safe place to release all the grief, the guilt, and the frustration that had been building up for so long. "I don't know how to fix it," Nolan admitted, his voice shaky. "I don't know how to fix what happened. I don't even know where to begin." Amara reached across the table, her hand resting gently on his. "You don't have to fix everything, Nolan. You just have to take it one step at a time. Healing doesn't happen all at once, but you can start by letting people in, by letting yourself feel what you're feeling." Nolan swallowed hard, feeling something stir within him. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the depth of his pain without trying to numb it, without pushing it away. It was overwhelming, but it was also freeing. He didn't have to carry it all alone anymore. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Nolan didn't feel completely lost. As the evening drew to a close, Amara stood to leave, but before she stepped out the door, she turned to him one last time. "If you ever need me, Nolan," she said quietly, "I'm just a call away." He nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. For the first time in a long time, Nolan felt the possibility of hope flicker to life inside him. Finding the strength to heal. The next few days felt like a blur, with Nolan waking up to the same routine of silence and isolation. But now there was a subtle shift. Amara's visit, her words, her presence, everything had left a mark on him. For the first time in months, Nolan found himself not entirely trapped in his thoughts, not completely swallowed by the shadows of his past. He was beginning to feel the faintest hint of hope, like a light flickering in a dark room. He continued with his usual work, but now he made small changes. He began to get up earlier, take walks around the block, and even eat a proper meal for the first time in weeks. He started pushing himself, inch by inch, out of the fog that had clouded his world for so long. Yet despite all the small victories, there was still a wall. It wasn't easy for Nolan to let anyone get close, not fully. He had built so many defenses around himself that even though he wanted to trust Amara, he didn't know how. It wasn't just about her kindness or her gentle persistence. It was the fear of depending on someone, the fear of letting them see just how broken he felt inside. It had been a few days since their last conversation, and though he had received a couple of texts from Amara, Nolan had kept his distance. He told himself that he didn't want to bother her or put any more pressure on their budding friendship. He didn't want to rely on her. But then, on a Thursday afternoon, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Amara. "Amara. Hey Nolan, I was thinking about you again. Are you free for coffee tomorrow morning?" It took Nolan a few minutes before he typed back, his fingers hesitating over the screen. "Nolan. Sure, that sounds good." He hit send, then immediately regretted it. What was he doing? Why did he say yes? But before he could change his mind, the next message from Amara came in. "Amara. Great, I'll see you at the usual place, 9 a.m. Nolan felt a knot form in his stomach. He had spent years avoiding people, keeping to himself to avoid feeling anything too deeply. But now, here was Amara showing up with her warmth, her willingness to help. He didn't know how to process that. Still, he pushed aside his doubts and got ready for the morning. When Nolan arrived at the cafe the next day, Amara was already sitting at a small table near the window, sipping her coffee. The sun shone through the glass, casting a soft, golden glow on her face. She looked up as he approached, and her smile was effortless, like a burst of light that pushed away the shadows in the room. "Hey, Nolan," she said warmly. "I'm glad you could make it." He nodded, pulling out the chair across from her. "Yeah, me too. It's been a while." "It's been too long," she agreed. "How have you been, really?" Nolan paused. He wanted to lie. He wanted to say he was fine, that everything was just fine. But the truth felt too close to the surface. He couldn't lie to her, not now. "I've been okay," he said, his voice low. "Better, I think, a little less numb." Amara's expression softened. "I'm glad to hear that." There was an awkward silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. For some reason, it felt safe, as though neither of them had to fill every second with words. They just existed in the moment. After a few moments, Amara set her cup down and leaned forward slightly. You know, Nolan, I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other night, about not knowing how to fix everything. Nolan stiffened at the mention of that conversation. He had been hoping she wouldn't bring it up. The weight of it had sat with him ever since. I didn't mean to burden you with all that, he said quickly. It's just, sometimes it feels like there's no way out, like I'm stuck in this place and no matter what I do, I can't get out. You don't have to fix everything at once, Amara said, her voice gentle but firm. Healing takes time and there's no right way to do it. You've been through so much, Nolan, and you don't have to do it alone. Her words were like a balm to his tired soul. The burden he had been carrying for so long felt just a little lighter. For the first time, he realized that maybe he didn't have to solve everything by himself. Maybe it was okay to lean on someone who cared, someone who wasn't judging him. I'm not sure I know how to trust people again, Nolan admitted. After everything, I've just been afraid of letting anyone get too close. I don't want to drag anyone down with me. Amara's eyes softened with understanding. I get that, she said quietly. But you don't have to do it all alone, Nolan. I'm here whether you want to talk or just sit in silence. You don't have to carry it all by yourself. There was a long pause before Nolan spoke again. He wasn't sure why he was telling her this, why he was letting his walls come down. But there was something in her gaze, something in the way she made him feel seen, that made it easier to open up. I've been so lost for so long, Nolan said, his voice cracking slightly. I don't even know what I'm supposed to feel anymore. It's like I'm stuck in this haze. Amara reached across the table, her hand resting on his. I don't have all the answers, Nolan, but you're not alone, and you don't have to have it all figured out today. You just have to keep going. Nolan felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't a grand epiphany or a sudden fix, but it was something real. Amara's presence was like a thread that was slowly pulling him out of the darkness, one small step at a time. I'm glad you're here, Nolan said quietly, finally allowing himself to be honest with her. Amara smiled, a simple knowing smile. I'm glad, too. As they sat together, sipping coffee and talking about small, inconsequential things, Nolan felt something shift within him. It wasn't an instant transformation. Healing didn't happen in an instant, and trust wasn't something that could be built overnight. But with each conversation, each shared moment, he felt himself coming back to life. For the first time in a long time, Nolan felt like he could breathe again. And that was enough. The turning point. As the days passed, Nolan's life slowly began to shift, imperceptibly at first, then more noticeably as time wore on. Amara had become an anchor in his storm, her unwavering kindness providing him with a sense of security he hadn't realized he needed. It wasn't that he suddenly had all the answers or that everything was magically fixed. He was still haunted by memories of the past, still wrestling with the trauma that had torn his life apart. But with each day, he felt less like a prisoner of his grief, and more like a person who had the potential to heal. One Sunday morning, Amara sent him a simple text. How about a walk today? It's a beautiful day outside. Nolan hadn't been out much on his own for a while, still unsure of his footing in the world beyond his apartment. But something in her message tugged at him. He had learned to appreciate the small joys in life once again, and a walk in the fresh air sounded like something he could handle. Nolan, yeah, I think that sounds nice. They met in the park an hour later, the morning sun casting soft golden rays through the trees. The sound of birds chirping and the distant murmur of other park-goers created a peaceful ambience. As Amara approached him, he couldn't help but smile, the familiarity of her presence easing the tension in his chest. Ready for a walk? She asked, her voice light and upbeat. Nolan nodded, adjusting his jacket. Yeah, let's go. They walked side by side, not needing to fill the silence with words. It wasn't uncomfortable, just a quiet, easy companionship that had become more natural with every passing day. As they strolled through the park, Nolan began to notice things again. The soft rustling of the leaves in the breeze, the warmth of the sun on his face, the laughter of children playing in the distance. These were things he had once taken for granted, but now they felt significant, like tiny miracles he hadn't fully appreciated before. So how's work been? Amara asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Nolan thought for a moment before answering. It's been okay, I guess. I've been trying to get back into a routine, but some days are harder than others. Do you feel like you're getting closer to finding a balance? She pressed, glancing at him. Nolan hesitated. It wasn't easy for him to talk about progress, especially when it felt so slow, so uneven. But with Amara's gentle encouragement, he found himself speaking more honestly. "I don't know," he said after a moment. "Some days I feel like I'm taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but other days it's like I can actually see a way forward even if it's just a little bit." Amara smiled, her eyes warm and understanding. "That's progress, Nolan. Sometimes it's the small steps that lead to the biggest changes." He looked at her, a faint sense of awe creeping into his chest. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear those words. It was strange to feel seen and understood in such a way, especially after years of hiding his pain from everyone, including himself. "Thanks," he said quietly, almost unsure of how to express his gratitude. They continued walking, and as they did, Nolan felt something else happening, a shift in how he viewed the world. The weight on his shoulders, though still present, seemed a little lighter. With each conversation, with each moment spent with Amara, he was beginning to see that healing wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one that could take months, even years, but that didn't mean he had to take it alone. As they reached a small bench by a pond, they sat down, both of them looking out over the peaceful water. The moment was simple, yet profound. It wasn't a dramatic breakthrough, but it was enough for Nolan to feel like something had changed inside him. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was starting to live again. "You know," Amara said, after a long pause, "I don't think I've ever told you how much I admire your strength." Nolan raised an eyebrow, surprised by her words. "Strength?" he echoed, looking at her with a mix of confusion and disbelief. "What do you mean?" Amara turned to face him, her expression earnest. "It takes incredible strength to go through what you've been through and still try to find a way to move forward. Not everyone would have the courage to even try. And you've been doing it, step by step, even when it feels like nothing's changing." Nolan swallowed, the emotions stirring within him feeling foreign yet comforting. "I don't feel strong," he admitted softly. "I feel broken, and I don't know if I'll ever be fully whole again." Amara placed a hand on his, her touch warm and reassuring. "No one expects you to be perfect, Nolan, and I don't think you have to be whole to be worthy of love or kindness. You're already enough just as you are." For the first time in a long time, Nolan felt something stir in his chest, something that resembled hope. It wasn't a grand revelation or an immediate change, but it was a quiet understanding that maybe, just maybe, he was allowed to be imperfect. He didn't have to fix everything. He didn't have to have all the answers. He just had to keep moving forward. The days after that walk became a slow, steady progression toward healing. Nolan continued his work, took more walks, and bit by bit allowed Amara to become a part of his life. They still didn't talk about everything, and there were days when the old, familiar darkness threatened to return. But now, when it did, he knew he wasn't alone. He had learned that it was okay to need someone, that it was okay to let someone see him, broken and all. And slowly, he found a piece of peace he had thought was lost forever. A few weeks later, Nolan sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen. He had finished an important project for work and was considering his next steps when his phone buzzed. It was a message from Amara. "Amara. Hey, Nolan, I just wanted to remind you how far you've come. You're not the same person you were when I first met you, and I'm so proud of everything you've achieved. I know it's not easy, but I believe in you. Always." Nolan smiled, feeling a sense of warmth spread through him. He looked out the window, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. He knew that. But for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it, 1 step at a time, with Amara by his side.